Hello, viewers. Welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA and Jaipur Dialogue. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our show today. Before I begin, let me make my traditional request to like, subscribe, and support our channel. And, your support is vital. Your feedback is essential. So that's what makes us better every single day. So today we are going to talk about the Prime Minister of Canada made a rather remarkable statement accusing India of participating in the killing or the unsubstantiated claims on the death of infamous Khalistani terrorist Mr. Niger. To talk about this matter, I have the greatest of pleasure in welcoming Mr. Terry Milewski, a Canadian journalist of great reputation, whose book, Blood for Blood, in which he documents 50 years of global Khalistan effort that is going on. So Terry, welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA, and great to see you after a very long time.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to it.
Sure. I want to begin the conversation from a quote from a very famous movie, Enemies of the State, in which at a critical juncture, Will Smith's character goes into mafia den to try an effort to unravel the mystery. And Gene Hackman says, "You are either incredibly stupid or incredibly smart." So on that incredibly stupid and incredibly smart analogy, how would you rate Mr. Trudeau's speeches and the action that he did in the Parliament, Canadian Parliament?
Well, he's certainly got a lot of nerve because he's managed the rare feat of painting himself into a corner while simultaneously putting his head in a noose, because he has taken a very big risk here. If he doesn't have the goods, if he doesn't have the evidence to fill the gaping hole in his presentation, then he's surely finished. He's already at a very low ebb in the polls. If there were an election tomorrow, the Conservative opposition would certainly win, according to these polls. And Canadians generally have more or less, they're conveying to the pollsters and to journalists that they've kind of had enough of Trudeau. He's had his time, and he's done 8 years. He might be able to last 9, which is par for the course for Canadian prime ministers, for Mr. Harper, his predecessor, before that for Mulroney and Craigyan, and so on. So he's now rolled the dice here by making an allegation which he has not proved, and which he will have to prove if he's to survive this episode, because he doesn't have a reservoir of credibility anymore with the Canadian public that would carry him through this without putting his cards on the table. Now, he's going to have to what we're going to see now is pressure building on him to say, well, what is it? What is your evidence for this extraordinary allegation? And in the background of this lurks the realization that we all know who knows. And that's Mr. Modi. Think about it. Mr. Trudeau went to the G20 in New Delhi, did he not? And have this very frosty meeting. A very brief and frosty meeting after several previous meetings between the two sides on this matter. And he raised the matter of this assassination, as he alleges, with Mr. Modi, and I quote, "in no uncertain terms."
Right.
So, and imagine this meeting, if you will. There's no way that Mr. Modi's just sat there like a potted plant and didn't ask any questions. When Trudeau presented this to him and it directly accused India of having a role in the assassination of Mr. Niger in Surrey, BC on June the 18th. There's no way Mr. Modi would have sat there and said, "Oh, that's too bad." No, he would have asked in outrage. He would have asked, "Well, what are you talking about? What's your evidence?" I mean, can you imagine in this meeting without him asking that question? Of course not. So what I'm saying is that we all know that if Trudeau won't come through with the details, we know that the Indians know them too, such as they are. So if they have a good case in India for showing that what Trudeau has presented is rubbish, that it's not true, that they can contradict it somehow, or show that the person, whoever or persons that they suspect weren't there at the time, whatever. If they can explode Trudeau's theory, they're not going to wait. They're going to do it. The relations are already at that terrible state. They were already cool. Then they went to frosty. Now they're in the deep freeze. You can kiss goodbye to a free trade agreement, to the trade mission that was planned by the Trade Minister of Canada. It's going to take a long time to come back from this. And my analysis is that before we get to the end of this, it's going to get worse, not better.
It would get worse rather than better. And
Yes.
as we spoke about in our democracy and the rule of law, if he talked about this matter without evidence, then it is going to be terrible for both countries' relationships. And it will rest on Mr. Trudeau's shoulders that he made an allegation. So let's talk about one more element. You very rightly said that if he talked with Prime Minister Modi in no uncertain terms, to quote unquote, and obviously Mr. Modi, as you very rightly observed, he wouldn't have taken it as a silk-potted plant. So the question arises here, what was the desperation for him to make the statement in Parliament if he has not been able to produce the evidence as yet?
Yes, it's a good question. What was the urgency? Why couldn't he sit on this for a while? Well, remember that prime ministers are human too, and that he suffered a grave humiliation in New Delhi. I mean, it was great fun on Indian television. I was on a few Indian television shows, and they certainly had a lot of fun at Canada's expense, describing how Mr. Modi had humiliated Trudeau and punched him in the nose and so forth. And there was no doubt that Trudeau left New Delhi when he eventually did, once they got a plane for him that worked, in disarray. And that this was something from which he needed to recover if it wasn't to enter history as another Trudeau failure in India. You will remember the background, that on his first visit to India in 2018, that ended with a fiasco when it emerged that a convicted Khalistani terrorist had somehow wangled an invitation, was dining with the Prime Minister at the High Commissioner's residence on his official visit to India. Can you imagine that nobody in Trudeau's entourage, and not Trudeau himself, realized that it might not be a good idea to have a convicted Khalistani terrorist coming to dinner with the Prime Minister in New Delhi? That it might not look very good. I mean, of course, when that got out, it was a shock. It was a disaster politically and diplomatically for the Trudeau administration. And the gentleman was disinvited rapidly, and it was a humiliating exit from New Delhi on that occasion. So there wasn't a reservoir of goodwill, let's say, that would ease Trudeau's passage through New Delhi on this visit. And he must have returned to Ottawa, I believe, feeling the sting of the blows that Modi had landed on his nose. And he must have wanted to find a way out pretty quick. And this presented an opportunity. I don't think there was that much urgency initially, but he created the urgency to reveal what he had by revealing it to the Allies. He initially seems to have had the idea that if he could recruit some of Canada's allies, the Five Eyes, for example, the UK, the US, Australia, if he could rally some allies to, as it were, figuratively stand behind him, just in the shot over his shoulder, as it were, to say that we are united as allies against this outrageous violation of international law and sovereignty and blah, 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 then that would have been a great thing at the G20. This would have been a triumph of a kind for the Canadian team delegation. But the Allies don't seem to have been that thrilled by the idea. As you know, India has clout that it didn't have before these days. India is not just a rising power economically and politically, but it's also now the fulcrum. But, we need India more than India needs us to join with the West, as it were, to confront China. This is the strategy of Canada. This is the strategy of the United States. The Biden administration certainly wants to keep India in the tent, if that's not an absurd analogy, for a nation of 1.3 billion people. So this meant that the information was out to some degree, right? That the allies all knew. That Prime Minister Sunak in the UK, President Biden, President Macron, all of them were taken to some degree, we don't know exactly the details, into Canada's confidence. Look, we've got a problem with India, and here it is. And they would have to reveal something. So the word was out. So and it wouldn't have been very good if Trudeau, if they stole his story. It wouldn't be good for Trudeau if he was not able to make his announcement because it had already leaked. So he had to be pretty quick about it. So first day of Parliament, he makes his announcement, and we're still suffering the consequences because everyone is now wondering, what's the answer to this question? What is he going to put in that hole in the middle of his presentation? If he doesn't have evidence, Trudeau is finished, in my view. If it turns out that this is not sustainable, that the evidence won't sustain the very large allegations that he made, and that the allegations are, in the main, to the Canadian people and to the people of the world, not credible as he claimed, then he's through, in my view. I don't think he could survive until the next election in next year.
Very astute observation, Terry, as always. And I was wondering about one more thing, is that, as the famous saying goes, that politicians don't act in haste and they are not stupid when they say or do something. They definitely evaluate strategically and tactically the consequences of what they say and do. So what could have prompted him, in addition to the fact that he wanted to out what he had already shared with the allies, and allies have not come forward to support him in this matter. So the issue is, are his domestic concerns, domestic politics, compelling him to take a position which is clearly anti-India while he's harboring and supporting and riding on the backs of Khalistanis specifically? Because, as you rightly pointed out in his previous visit, they dared India by including a convicted guy in the entourage. Why did he do that? What was the purpose of doing that? It was an act of...
Well, be careful. I mean, there's another old saying that you should hesitate to ascribe to a conspiracy what may easily be explained by incompetence. There is an assumption in your question that they knew what they were doing. For one thing, Trudeau didn't know about the invitation to this guy in 2018. His entourage, his staff, and the 14 MPs who accompanied him on that mission certainly should have known. And the backbench MP who actually put this guy, the convicted terrorist, on the guest list at that dinner, he certainly should have known. Somebody in his entourage should have realized that this is not going to look good, guys. And they didn't. But I don't think that's because Trudeau planned it personally. I don't think he was aware. And I don't think that the Trudeau administration and the Liberal Party of Canada, which views itself as the natural governing party of Canada, I don't think they really get what they've been playing at. They think that in the main, this is a generalization, but they seem to think that Sikhs are all Khalistanis.
Right.
Now, and anyone who looks at it for a moment would realize that this is utter nonsense, and that the support for an independent Khalistan in Punjab, where most of the world's Sikhs live, 75% of them, is microscopic. I mean, it's not just low, like, it's 10 or 15% or something like that, like, a typical third party support in any democracy. No, in the last election, the separatists got 2.5% of the vote and 0 seats. And that was a banner year for them. The year before, the previous election in 2017, they got 0.3% of the vote. Nota, none of the above got more than the separatists did in that election. And in the last election, last year in Punjab, the BJP, a Hindu nationalist party, got more votes in a Sikh majority state than the Sikh separatists. So all of that is just to say that most people don't realize how very, very low the support is, almost off the map in Punjab for a separate Sikh state. And in Canada, it's been imagined for years in the Liberal Party, and to some degree in the other parties as well. I'm not excluding the Conservatives, by the way. It's been assumed that the way to the votes of the Sikhs in Canada, and of course we have 770,000 Sikhs in Canada, the largest share of the Sikh diaspora anywhere in the world. The UK is not far behind, but we're number one in that category. The way to appeal to them at election time is to humor and to pander to the Khalistani element, and to look the other way. When you go to the Vaisakhi parade, a smart Canadian politician smiles and waves, hustles for votes, and looks the other way when the parade floats go by, garlanded with tinsel and the posters showing famous martyrs, assassins, and mass murderers from the Khalistani movement, to include, for example, in Canada, the worst mass murderer in our history, Talvinder Parmar, the Air India bomber, the Kanishka bomber, popularly seen in pictures in the Langar halls, and a life-size portrait on the outside of an important Gurdwara, a Sikh temple in Surrey, British Columbia, where Mr. Nijjar was killed. Now, sorry for the long answer, but I'm saying really that it's bred in the bone. It's a generational thing. It lasted many, many years that the Sikh diaspora in Canada, and in particular this small minority within it, this very active, disciplined, organized minority, they figured out Canadian politics. So they say, you come to my Vaisakhi parade, you smile and wave, and you don't say a word against these martyr pictures and the glorification of terrorism that implies. You don't say anything about it, and I can bring you 10,000 votes, because people will vote how we tell them to in the Gurdwara, and we control the Gurdwara. That's how it works.
Thank you for a very credible response to that. But here is a thought, and you made a very clear mention of that. They have understood Canadian politics. It's not only about Canadian politics anymore, because what we find is that the extremist elements, as the theory goes, that extremes drive the middle. The extremist agenda has been to capture the imagination of the democratic rule of law. Votes matter. And that's where they take advantage of the politicians who are all set, or all they want is power through various vote banks. And what amuses me and what bothers me more than amusement is the fact that how Trudeau has been visibly riding on the backs of Khalistanis, particularly, who are very demonstrative in the scheme of things, undermining the role of the majority Sikhs who probably are not supporting this at all. So what is Trudeau's compulsion of doing what he's doing to ride, I won't spoil the name of a tiger, but proverbially speaking, riding this tiger?
Well, remember that Trudeau's family has always viewed the world a little differently. Pierre Trudeau in his day, and I won't delve too far into the history, but just let's talk about the Trudeau family, was a pioneer in the appreciation and the acceptance of communist China. He was one of the first Western explorers to visit China when the communists came to power, to explore it, to write about it, very lucidly, by the way. and made himself famous. And all over China, Pierre Trudeau was a bit of a hero because he represented a Western politician who was not like the others that just went damning the communists and damning China. And here was somebody who understood us. So there's a background. People ask for today, as related to the question you've just asked, why does Trudeau seem to have a different attitude to foreign interference by China in our elections, for example, which is a proven matter. This is not an airy allegation. This is proven. And why does he have a very different attitude to foreign interference by India, where suddenly he sees Indians under every bed? And well, there is a background to it. And remember, and it's also relevant to this conversation, that Indira Gandhi back in the day, in 1982, I'm talking about now, this is 3 years before the Air India bombing, the Kanishka bombing of 1985. In 1982, Indira Gandhi asked Pierre Trudeau, look, you've got more separatists in your country than I have back in India. You need to crack down on these people. And we want the extradition of this guy, Parmar, the leader of the Baba Khalsa. He is a dangerous international terrorist. He's already killed policemen in Punjab. We want to extradite him for murder. He's an international terrorist. You need to get rid of him. We want to put him in jail. And Pierre Trudeau said no. Didn't want to take part, didn't want to take sides in an internal Indian battle. There are all kinds of excuses. They even went to the Indians and said, oh, well, the reason that we are refusing, this was the official response, by the way, in writing.
Yes.
They told the Indians that the reason that we won't surrender him for extradition is because the Indian government doesn't accept the Queen as head of state. And you sort of scratch your heads, what? What on earth does the Queen have to do with this? And the answer is, of course, absolutely nothing. But the rationale was that the Commonwealth extradition arrangements didn't cover India because India was a member of the Commonwealth, but nevertheless didn't acknowledge the Queen as head of state. Well, I mean, so what? It's just a flimsy, even comical excuse. So sorry for the history lesson, but this is the background in Canada, that long before we suffered this atrocity of the Air India bombing, we were already cutting the Khalistanis some slack, accommodating them, and it became traditional. Remember that what I've described to you about the martyr posters up on the walls of the Gurdwara, this year we had parading through the streets of Brampton, Ontario, which is kind of little Punjab in Canada. We've had this obscene spectacle of a huge flatbed truck with a life-size diorama, a reenactment and celebration of the assassination of Indira Gandhi in 1984. Can you imagine? With plentiful red paint splattered on Mrs. Gandhi's sari, so the kids get the message, make sure we get the message. This was a bloody affair, and we're proud of it. We celebrate this assassination. This was a great day. And here are the life-size images of the two Sikh bodyguards who murdered her on that day, October the 31st of 1984. And more besides. The killer posters. Now, these have appeared worldwide, but especially in Canada. The killer posters naming and shaming and showing the photographs of specific Indian diplomats, the High Commissioner, the consul in Toronto, the consul in Vancouver, and similarly in Australia and in Italy and in the United States and in the UK. They're diplomats too. A dozen of them, 20 or 30 of them by the time you add them all up, all named as killers of, for example, and most significantly, Hardeep Nijjar in Surrey, BC. So wait a minute, we're supposed to imagine that the Indian High Commissioner in Australia was named as one of the killers of Hardeep Nijjar in Surrey. So he must have made a 26,000 kilometer round trip that weekend from Australia to Surrey, British Columbia, to assist his fellow diplomats, his deadly diplomat brigade, all with 007 numbers, I suppose, international men of mystery, to assist them in the assassination of Mr. Nijjar in Surrey. I mean, the whole thing is absurd. But this has been normalized. The things like the celebration of the assassination of Indira Gandhi, that's been normalized. And the martyr posters, that's been normalized. We've had this kind of thing for years. It's completely normal and it's legal. Canadian law allows that. We don't have, for example, in Britain, you saw in New Delhi at the G20 how Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was a bit of a hero in New Delhi. He was already because of his Hindu ancestry, but he said, "Oh no, not in Britain. We're not going to allow any space for these Khalistani extremists. Not in Britain." Well, he could say that because Britain has legislation, for example, against the glorification of terrorism. We don't have that in Canada. Britain's had it for 17 years. They woke up to this problem, and we didn't, and we're paying the price.
Paying the price. This has brought about some, thanks to technology, because of which news travels faster than the speed of lightning, which I prefer to say sometimes. It has brought about a significant reaction from the Indian public. A friend of mine put on Twitter that if Canada does produce evidence of India doing it, I will forgive all failures of Prime Minister Modi for having done this. We suddenly go up in the ranks of CIA, MI5, MI6, SAS, and what have you, who do things overseas and everybody knows about it. How Osama bin Laden was taken out. So these are, suddenly Indian RAW becomes a dreaded and powerful organization to have been able to execute. That's one sector of the joy part of it. It's a vicarious kind of a thing, but hey, we did it. Second one is the fact that people have said, what the hell? We bring $10 billion worth of students' contribution to Canada. People come there, and Prime Minister Trudeau doesn't give a damn about it. So the question that comes about is, everybody knows that the toolkit is operating to dismantle Prime Minister Modi from his seat. None other than George Soros announced $1 billion worth of his personal wealth at WEF, World Economic Forum, to remove Modi from his seat. Is Trudeau ending up as a toolkit operator, as a desperate toolkit operator on behalf of the elements that want to remove Modi as a regime change operation? Because Mr. Trudeau was also a World Economic Forum young leader at one point in time. Do you think he's influenced by those?
No, I think he's just trying to save his own neck, to be honest. I don't think that he's part of any plot against Mr. Modi. Let me just say a word about your preamble. I think you're correct that there is an element of pride, which is, shall we say, unseemly on the Indian side. That, if indeed we were involved in this, well, we're not shedding any tears for Mr. Najjar anyway. What's not to like about getting rid of him? But I would caution against that emotion. I don't say that you're subscribing to it, but I mean, there is a horrendous logical problem. Indians can either say, A, we didn't do it, or B, we did it and we're proud of it because he was a terrorist. But you can't have it both. You can't have it both ways. So pick a lane is my message on that. And be careful what you wish for. I don't think that the Modi government has endorsed that feeling. They're not saying that we're proud of it. They're saying we didn't do it, that the Canadian allegations are absurd, right? So the question now becomes, what's Trudeau's motivation? You're wondering whether he is a part of some plot or movement to get rid of Modi. I don't think so at all. I don't think that it's he's playing some grand geopolitical game. I think his game is save my neck. I think that he was humiliated at the G20 and that he is outraged by what he believes to be a case of Indian extraterritorial execution. and he thinks this is an outrage to the liberal values of the rule of law and national sovereignty. I think that he believes all of that, and no reason why he shouldn't. I mean, let's not endorse a world where countries do. I mean, Canada endorsed the killing of Osama bin Laden. I mean, let's all grow up and let's agree that in this world these things do happen. Governments do carry out extraterritorial executions, and depending on who it gets executed, we're in favor of it. It depends who it is. So Canadians all applauded when Osama bin Laden was killed, but they're not applauding this case. And if indeed India is operating hit squads in Canada, then there's very few Canadians who would endorse that. But that all remains to be proved. My own theory is that it's important to remember, let's put it no more strongly than that motives can be mixed. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not an either-or proposition, that either the killing of Mr. Nijjar was a gangland hit, local vendetta between gangsters, as is often said. That's a prevailing theory in Surrey. Or, in the alternative, it was a geopolitical reaching out of the Indian hand to murder its critics overseas. It's possible that there was a mixture of motives and a common purpose between different actors, and that the theory that this was a gangland killing between rival gangsters, which involves the previous killing of Raputam Malik, as you know, one of the Air India suspects, the financier of the Baba Khalsa, the terrorist group which blew up Air India, who was acquitted at the trial in 2005. The theory there was that there was bad blood between Malik and Nijjar, and that Nijjar was involved somehow in the killing last July of 2022. Of the previous year, of 2022, of Malik, that Nijjar was involved in that because of the bad blood between them, and because Malik had cozied up to the Modi government. Malik had written a letter to Prime Minister Modi, you may recall, I think we've discussed this before,
yes,
in which he praised Mr. Modi for the great things that he had done for the Sikhs, doors that have been opened for the Sikhs by the great noble government of Mr. Modi. It was a gushing letter, and it must have shocked Mr. Malik's friends in the Khalistani movement, of which he had been such an important member for many years. So maybe he had reformed. Maybe he was now an ally of the Modi government. There must have been questions about his new affiliations. So imagine that you could marry the theory that the Malik camp sought to avenge his murder by taking out Mr. Nijjar, classic gangland vendetta. And imagine also that Malik's new friends in the Modi government smiled upon it. Imagine that the Canadian Security Intelligence Service discovered an association between Mr. Malik and somebody associated with or friendly with the Indian secret services, security agencies. Then you might have a marriage of motives which might explain the death of Mr. Nijjar, and it might explain, I'm speculating, it might explain how Trudeau came to make his announcement the other day. Now, I'm reaching very far into the realm of the possible, but and of course, I'm not offering, like Trudeau, I'm not offering any evidence to support my brilliant theory. I'm just saying that there could be a mix of it's not necessarily one or the other, if you see what I'm driving at.
yeah,
It's not necessarily either or, either the government did it or it was a gangster. Gangsters sometimes are in league with governments. Governments sometimes hire gangsters to do their dirty work, do they not? But let me make one other point before I leave the question of theories about the murder. that is that where are the police? Why haven't the police identified and charged the shooters? In the case of Mr. Malik, they identified the shooters, two young punks, two goons with criminal records, but they have not identified who paid them, who hired them. I mean, it was a contract hit. It was a classic contract hit. The two masked men running to the getaway car. The burning car is discovered by police. Same routine as with Nijja. They burn the car because they figure there's no fingerprints and no DNA survives the fire. So that if that were the case, then you would expect, if Trudeau is now announcing kind of the result of the investigation, that we have discovered that the Indian government's agents were involved. Why have we not even discovered who the shooters are, let alone who paid them? Have we discovered who paid, but not who they paid? That would be extraordinary to me. And so it's another big hole to me in Trudeau's theory. And it suggests that the absence of evidence is even more profound than we first imagined. I mean, you would assume that the problem might be that they usually try to have deniability, right? If a contractor wants to hire a couple of killers to eliminate a rival, you would expect him to take precautions so that he couldn't be identified in the case that the shooters are caught. Well, how would they know? How would they know who the shooter is, who the contractor is, if they don't know who the shooter is? I'm puzzled by that, and I think it's very odd that the police have said nothing to endorse the idea that they have discovered that there's some link to the Indian government. I find that Trudeau's going to have to answer that question eventually.
I think he will have to, because having made the statement, he has to come up with something.
Yeah.
Evidence or cooked up, whatever, as it happens in the world of crime, because you are not guilty until proven. So this is one of the issues. But I just to be clear to you and to everybody else, that when I refer to the joy and the glee, is talking about the average Joe in India, who is expressing his emotion on social media. This is not the government saying that we are delighted that he's dead or whatever. The second part also is that government of India, I mean, so far as I know, you are a part of a prominent democracy, as I am, and we don't go around killing our critics. Criticism is part of the game in democracy. That's part of the dissent. But in this particular instance, it's an extremist terrorist who was eliminated. So that's the two elements. It's not the critic, but an extremist guy who was practicing terror as a tactic. But the other question that comes to my mind, you very rightly said, a tiny piece of Khalistan in Punjab of India's side. But how is it, what would you say, that these Khalistanis never talk about the Khalistan that Punjab, in Pakistan controlled Punjab? They don't talk about taking that as element of Khalistan. They only talk about the Indian side of Punjab. That makes me curious. That is this Khalistan thing totally ISI inspired? Are the ISI people have infiltrated the Khalistani camp and they dress like Sikhs and indulge in to malign the broader Sikh community? What's your take on that?
Well, I think that there's quite a lot of nonsense spoken about the relationship between the Khalistanis and the Pakistanis, because it's often said that the Khalistan movement is entirely the creation and the puppet of the ISI, which pays for Sikhs for Justice, which pays for the whole Khalistan. That's all fantasy to me. It's much simpler than that. This is a freebie for the Pakistanis, and it always has been. Pakistan, from the very beginning, and I'm going back to the 1971 war, the tearing off of Bangladesh, the humiliation of Pakistan at the hands of the Indian army, the humiliating surrender of 90,000 Pakistani troops, the desire of Pakistan to get revenge for that, to establish a buffer state between Pakistan and India, to cut off India's land access to Kashmir. For all of these reasons, for its own strategic reasons, nothing to do with wanting the best for the Sikhs. Not that Pakistan wanted the Sikhs to breathe free, to be free of Indian oppression. No, they had their own reasons for supporting the Khalistani movement passively, politically, diplomatically, but for free. It's a self-financing movement. The Sikh diaspora supports the efforts, for example, for the referendum generously. They've got plenty of money. They don't need Pakistan's money, and Pakistan doesn't have any money anyway. It's deeply in debt. It's becoming a wholly owned subsidiary of China. So my point about this is that Pakistan, for its own strategic reasons, has provided a safe haven, a refuge, training, access to weapons to Sikh militants historically. And I don't think that the Khalistani movement would have had any chance to mount a decade-long armed insurgency without Pakistan, without having somewhere to run to. And to this day, prominent Khalistani figures live in Pakistan. That doesn't mean that Pakistan pays for the Khalistani movement, because they don't have to. And it doesn't mean that it necessarily shares the ambitions of the Khalistani movement. Famously, a chief of the ISA told Benazir Bhutto when she was prime minister of Pakistan that, look, it's like having an extra division of troops at our disposal. The Khalistanis are helping us make India bleed free of charge. So that's it may sound like a very simple explanation, but it's simpler than the idea that somehow Sikhs for Justice and the Khalistani movement more generally are all the puppets of the ISI doing the bidding of the ISI, who gives the orders and pays the money. I don't think that happens at all, and I don't think it needs to. But in the modern age, where we stand today, is we have to remember that when you point out that Khalistanis don't claim traditional historic Punjab, they only claim the right to have an independent nation in the territory occupied, as they call it, by India, but not that part of their territory occupied by Pakistan. And you're right to say that this is curious at the very least, because, I mean, most of historical Punjab was on the west side of the Radcliffe Line in Pakistan. They talk about the Sikh Empire of 200 years ago under Maharaja Ranjit Singh. They wax nostalgic about the good old days when we had our own empire. Well, it wasn't in modern India. The seat of that empire, as you will know, was in Lahore. Are they claiming Lahore for part of the new independent nation of Khalistan? No, why not? It's a question. What about Nankana Sahib, only the birthplace of Guru Nanak, the first Sikh guru, the founder of the religion? They're not claiming that. That's in Pakistan. So you will see, if you look at their map, they're very generous with their ambitions in India. They like to have a great big chunk of Rajasthan and Haryana and Himachal Pradesh and chunks of other states, Uttar Pradesh. Why not? They want to have their capital in Shimla. First, I've heard that there's any historical association as there is with Nankana Sahib or with Lahore. But the bottom line is that they don't want to forfeit Pakistani support. They can't go without it. They need to have the only geopolitical friend they have in Pakistan. They need that, and they don't want to antagonize the Pakistanis by making any claims on Pakistani territory. And the idea that Pakistan is the great friend of the Sikhs, I think, crashes into the rocks of the realization that the Sikh population of Pakistan has been plummeting in the last couple of decades because of, as you well know, forced conversions, forced marriages of not just of Sikh girls, but of all religious minorities in Pakistan. If you look at how Pakistan has been treating its own Sikhs inside Pakistan, you will pretty soon be disabused of the idea that Pakistan is the great savior of the Sikhs.
Very well said. And I wanted to add to that, very simply put, as you said very correctly, that Rajiv Gandhi, when he was Prime Minister, visited Washington, D.C., it was here in D.C. that he told the Khalistani separatists that if you want a separate Khalistan, go across the border and claim it there. So Rajiv Gandhi was bold enough to tell them then exactly this, what you said just now. Last question of the day, Vibhuti, this topic is very, very serious and very problematic for both sides of the aisle. Tell us one thing about the impact that we see going forward, because India has issued a travel advisory. Indian lives are at risk because these people attack individuals. You and I are all under scanner of those elements. So the question arises is that will Canadian government have the power to protect individual Hindu lives or Hindu lives in general, Indian lives in general in Canada if an untoward attack were to happen?
Do you mean an attack from which quarter?
Khalistani quarters, because these people target individuals.
They do. They do, and I would offer a caution. The Khalistani movement in Canada has become more sophisticated. Remember back in the day, I mean, we have no right to forget what happened back in the day, and I'm speaking now of the 1980s, that it was perfectly true that Khalistanis were viciously antagonistic towards their critics. To name only three examples, the beating of Ujjal Dosanjh, Canada's most successful Sikh politician of his generation, and a severe critic of the Khalistan movement, beaten within an inch of his life, is lucky to get away alive for his criticism of the Khalistanis. Balraj Dial in Toronto, another critic who formed a friendship association with Hindu friends, a young Sikh who befriended some Hindu friends and spoke up for the Longowal Agreement back in the day. I won't go into what that agreement described, but it was basically give peace a chance. And of course, the murder of Tara Singh Haya, a prospective Air India witness who heard a confession, had devastating evidence, gave it to the police, and was murdered before he could testify. So, and I could go on. The attack on the Indian High Commissioner in Winnipeg, 1984, who was attacked by a mob wielding sticks. There was a high level of violence directed against their critics by Khalistanis in Canada. However, having said all of that, fast forward now to today. They're fighting lawfare, not warfare. They send lawyers after you, not men with baseball bats, which is what happened to Balraj Dial back in the day. They are more clever at politics. They know how to burrow into the political parties, as we described at the outset of this conversation. And I don't think that they are necessarily launching. I don't think the danger now is that they are launching attacks on their critics. They do bully and pressure those who don't sing the Khalistani song. Your life might become uncomfortable if you live in the neighborhood and at the Gurdwara down the street, the Khalistanis prevail. There are cries of Khalistan Zindabad in the Gurdwara. There are pictures in the Langar Hall honoring great martyrs and mass murderers of the day. Figures from Toronto who joined the Khalistan Tiger Force and Khalistan Liberation Movement and pulled Hindus off buses in Punjab in the early 80s to be gunned down in the street. And if you speak up, you may find that your business is boycotted. You may find that your children have a hard time at school from the other kids. you may find it. I'll give you an anecdote of how it's working now. This isn't violence, remember, but I'm describing how it's working now. I mentioned a moment ago Tara Singh Hare, who was murdered before he could testify. His son became a provincial member of the Legislative Assembly and an elected politician. He was elected and re-elected for something like 12 years in Surrey as a critic of the Khalistanis, obviously. He tells the story of a young girl, he thinks she was about 14 years old, who said to him, Mr. Hare, why do you always refer to the Air India bombers as terrorists? They're heroes, she said. They're heroes. And he looked at her and said, what are you talking about? What about their families? What about their relatives? Do you ever think of that? And the girl said, no, I never thought of that. That's what she's learning at home, at school, at the Gurdwara. That's what she's learning today. This is what they're teaching their children. That's what the diorama celebrating the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi was about. That's what the martyr pictures on the walls of the Gurdwara, that's what they're about. They're teaching the next generation that these are heroes. And they're not carrying out terrorist attacks. They're not attacking Canadians in the streets. They are subtle. They're sophisticated. They're educated. They're intelligent. And they're organized. But that is what is being taught to young Sikhs today. And that is a shame and something that we must fight against as vigorously as we would have fought if it was physical violence.
Thank you very much. And this is important for all of us to bear in mind. A famous statement comes to my mind again, that criminals and thugs thrive and take advantage of the compassion of the society and the leniency in the rule of law. And that's what you are talking about, the lawfare.
Yeah.
Harry, thank you so much for joining today. It's very enlightening, very informative, and your passion about this subject matter is absolutely magnificent. Thank you very much for joining us, viewers of Jaipur Dialogue. Please give your feedback. Please like, subscribe, and support our channel. With these words, as I always say, Satyameva Jayate, truth must triumph. And if you want the truth must triumph, then you have to stand up and fight for the truth. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that seemed to go well.
Yes,
I did go on a bit, but at least we came in under an hour, so it could be worse. I mean, I've done something.
You will be able to catch at 10:30.
Sometimes I go on Twitter and they go on for 8 hours. I've done one that literally went on for just over 8 hours. Can you believe that?
I'm not surprised because
Twitter Spaces, they're just unlimited. You cross time zones and a whole new cohort of people wake up and get on Twitter. And
this is what I'm saying, that the revolution brought about, I call it the tectonic shift brought about by technology in the way we communicate, is just about fascinating. And that's why I say that news travels faster than the speed of lightning these days.
It sure does. Well, thanks for your time, Vibhuti. That was a good one.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.